We've summarised general approaches to registers and registration. We've described the issues surrounding title registration and the current conceptual innovations discussed in Scottish land law. We've also framed how modern approaches to indexing can support registration and title derivation. So, where does this leave us in terms of approaches to registration? We've got a number of different options. We can look at a register of deeds. So that's a register of legal change. Titles are derived, it's a monojural system, provides highly effective rights protection, is perceived to be slow for conveyancing. However, we've already demonstrated that modern indexing can resolve this. However, there's also the issue of how we solve the legacy data issues, because the fact that we can do it in an idealized world is great, but we actually have, X many years of current data that is not in the right format. We know that overriding interests are an issue, but this also can be resolved by effective spatial indexing. It's not the world's biggest problem. Mapp, Professor Mapp, that is, in 1978, identified 7 issues with deed-derived titles. 5 of those issues he stated could be resolved with registration systems available to him in 1978. This left 2 remaining issues. First one being adequacy of ownership. The purchaser should ensure the adequacy of the seller's derived ownership, so the indefeasible ownership problem, and the adequacy of immediate transfer. So the purchaser should ensure the adequacy of the seller's ability to transfer. So both of those issues can be solved by modern digital indexing. So how do we deal with error correction under a register of deeds? So taking our earlier identity theft exemplar, Anne is a registered owner of land. Barbara, stealing Anne's identity, sells the land to Colin, forges Anne's signature in a deed of transfer. Colin, in good faith, presents the deed for registration and deed is registered. As the deed is forged, Colin's title is void. At some point, the fraud will come to light, and a void deed is not improved by registration, and therefore no title is conferred. Indefeasibility is thus deferred. The point being here that a register of deeds is harsh. If Colin at some point sold that land over to somebody else, the original deed from Anne to Colin was still void, and so all of those chained down deeds after Colin would also be void. So the land would stay with Anne, irrespective of downstream transactions. We could then do a register of title. So this is a register of legal consequences. Titles are registered. It's a bijural system. Corrections can lead to bijural and legal inaccuracies. Rights are not always effectively protected. It's perceived to provide effective conveyancing. However, there is an increasing awareness of issues surrounding the rise of fraud and uncertainty surrounding immediate and deferred indefeasibility. There's indexing issues associated with discharging non-ownership rights, and there's the impact of Midas touch on void deeds and jurisdictions also that have first registrations. Overriding interests are still an ongoing issue. And so how do we resolve errors under a register of title? So again, getting back to that identity theft between Anne and Colin. So Colin presents this deed for registration. It's entered on the register as proprietor. So the effect of registration of Colin's deed is for Colin to become the owner instead of Anne, and that is now indefeasible. It's the unavoidable effect of a Midas touch. The judge, by the rules of land registration, the register is perfectly accurate in showing Colin as owner. However, if that facts are rerun under ordinary property law, the owner would be Anne and not Colin, for no title can pass under a forged deed. So this all gets down to essentially the issue of at what point in time can Anne deal with the fact that fraudulent deed has been put forward. So to the question, who is owner, the two systems of law gives different answers. The result is for the register to be inaccurate in the sense meant by the Act, but this is a bijural rather than actual inaccuracy. The owner is Colin according to one set of rules, but should be Anne according to the other set of rules. And here it's for the jurisdiction to decide how to proceed in terms of which pieces of law are given prominence. However, we can do what Scotland's done, or variations thereof, where you have a register of deeds, a register of titles, and a register of other things. So You can register your deeds, so a register of rights-based legal change and legal consequence, and then you can have a register of a chain of title detailing the indefeasible right holding for specific right types, and that will be a register of title ownership or a register of title lease. You're not dealing with the subordinate right representations in these registration processes. And then you deal with the derivation of register of title, and this is framed through the chain of title, but articulating benefits, restrictions, and responsibilities, i.e., the non-ownership and pertinence relationships that can be derived directly from both the chain of title and the register of deeds. This could also be extended to go over to other registers or overriding interests on other registers, as long as you have some dynamic spatial indexing. Titles can be more flexibly resolved, and that very much depends upon the relationship between how the two registers is configured and the wording in the jurisdiction. It is a bijural system, and so it does lead to risk that you can have bijural legal inaccuracies, but that flexibility between the systems and the registers gives you greater range of rights protection, as has been demonstrated in Scotland. It can provide effective and nuanced conveyancing, and once again, this is dependent on how the relationships between the two registers is configured. Overriding interests are an issue, but again, that can be fixed based upon this kind of effective spatial indexing case. And there's more likelihood of it happening here because there is clarity between what is your principal title element and your register of deeds. So, how are you going to resolve your identity theft? So, if the error comes to light, and this would be based upon the Scottish legislation, and can procure rectification and register, whereas Colin, and from that Colin will receive compensation for his loss. Colin's registration has no effect because it's void, and Anne remains the owner throughout. However, if the identity theft is not discovered, then upon the next transaction, the previous transaction is realigned to become a register error. Okay, and so at this point, Colin transfers the land to David. David's able to rely on a register statement that Colin is a proprietor. The transactional error that did exist is now realigned into a register error, and so the registration, David will receive an indefeasible title, and if Anne identifies that the fraud took place, she is now able to get the money rather than the mud because it's a register error. So the implication there is that the original owner, Anne, is not in possession as they're unaware of Colin's transactional claim to ownership. So in fact, given the current legislation, Colin has to have been in possession for over a year. As this type of error, the type of right, and the past possession all play a part in these kind of pathways to resolution. So in summary, deed registration is still good, but it needs modernizing in terms of indexing, proper indexing, legacy conversion. Title registration just exclusively looks increasingly weak and potentially subject to increased fraud under digital conveyancing. And then you have this mixed registration that is currently being championed by Scotland, and it potentially provides the best of both worlds. I personally think that it's a pure deed registration with efficient indexing is the best route, but that doesn't take into account the whole legacy conversion issue. The mixed registration decouples the ownership and lease registration from ownership rights, and that gives a huge amount of flexibility, and it allows the adoption of this kind of spatially enabled society approach to both to benefits, responsibilities, and restrictions, i.e., how you derive title implications from your register of ownership and lease. So, good things for this mixed registration, good things for the deed registration. Title registration looks increasingly problematic, particularly in terms of cyber security issues. Thank you very much.